Morning, everybody. So, like he said, we're going to be continuing in Judges today. Actually going to be in Judges 16. We're going to be continuing the story of Samson. So, if anybody remembers, last week, Pastor went over how Samson wasn't really as great of a guy as we always make him out to be. He was set aside, chosen by God, and he was supposed to be this great leader, and yet he couldn't really follow much of what he was told to do. Everything he did was about how he will do this. It was about what he was deserved, what he was owed, and it wasn't really about following God. Not much has changed between last week and this week, except for this week we get to see a little more about what Samson's weakness was, and it was women and lust. So, in Judges 16, 1-3, Samson went to Gaza. There he saw a prostitute and went in to have sex with her. The Gazites were told, "Samson has come here." So they surrounded the town and hid all night at the city gate, waiting for him to leave. They relaxed all night, thinking, "He will not leave until morning comes, and then we will kill him." Samson spent half the night with the prostitute, then he got up in the middle of the night and left. He grabbed the doors of the city gate, as well as the 2 posts, and pulled them right off, the bar and all. He put them on his shoulders and carried them up to the top of a hill, east of Hebron. So, we always focus on, wow, Samson got away from them, and he'd carry these bars and everything, and he was so strong. We don't really see his character here. We don't always focus on that. But I do want to focus today on his character again. So, if you remember, Samson's already married. He had a wife, and yet it doesn't seem like he made any effort to get her back after all the events that happened. Instead, he's already looking for another woman here. And not only that, but he went all the way to Gaza. That was a long way away from where he lived, so it's not like he was going out for a stroll. He had a purpose going here, and it seems like he didn't want everyone else to know this, and that's why he went so far away. But Samson isn't just a normal guy. He's supposed to be a judge. He's supposed to be Israel's leader, and yet here he is seeking prostitutes and going out of his way to go away from where he's supposed to be. And this isn't something that was tolerated in leaders back then, and it's something we don't even tolerate still in our leaders today. If our president or any of our other leaders was caught sneaking off to another country to be with a prostitute, we would probably not trust that leader anymore. That would be all over. And yet here's Samson, who's not only supposed to be Israel's leader, but supposed to be dedicated to God, doing exactly that. So, next section is probably the biggest section in the story of Samson, and it's the story everybody knows. It's about Samson and Delilah, Samson getting tricked, losing his powers, and getting captured. I'm not going to go over the entire story like we normally do, just because we already know the story for the most part, but what I want to do again here is focus on what we don't often see in the story. So like I already said, Samson goes and finds the woman Delilah, who is, again, a Philistine. We keep seeing here Samson, who's supposed to be an Israelite, who's supposed to marry only an Israelite and stay dedicated to God, continually seeking women, not only just one woman, but women, and women who aren't even Israelites. And we know the company you're with affects your character. And these people, these women, definitely affected Samson's character. Not that he had a great character to begin with. First thing to point out is, as we see the story all the way through, repeatedly he goes to her, he stays with her for a long time, so this isn't like a one and done thing. He stays with her. But as he's staying with her, it's obvious she's working with the Philistines. They come up to her and say, "Hey, we know this Samson guy is with you. We need to figure out what his secret is. We need to get his power removed so that we can take him down." So, same thing that happens with his wife. She goes to him, does everything she can to please him, and then says, "So, by the way, what's the secret of your power? How would I say, get rid of the power?" And anyone else would be like, "Oh, why do you want to ask this?" But Samson, being who he is and all, tells her. And he doesn't tell her his secret the first time, so you kind of see here, he doesn't quite trust her, but still, if any other person had asked, and any normal person was seeing this, they would be wondering why you were trying to figure this out. Samson doesn't seem to, and we know the reason why. It's because, just like everything else, Samson is focused on himself. It's all about what he can do. Oh, I can stay with this woman, and as long as I don't actually tell her, I can keep telling her lies, I can keep doing all this. because I'm great, I am the best, and I can do what I want. And that's the attitude we see here. It's a very arrogant attitude. It's not something that a normal person would do. It's not something that a great leader should do. But again, Samson wasn't a great leader. He was just a normal person with many faults who God chose to be the leader. But he obviously didn't trust her because she asks, he tells her. She does this, and then the Philistines come, and what do you know? He sells his powers. At this point, normally we would probably begin to suspect, oh, why were they here? But again, it's Samson. He doesn't. And so he continues on, and this cycle continues several times. And as you're reading this, people always wonder, well, why would Samson be tricked so badly to keep telling her after it's obvious she's trying to turn him over? Why would he, 1, tell her, 2, stay with her, and 3, eventually tell her a secret? First of all, like I already said, he told her the first time because it's all a game to him. He's the best and he knows it. Everybody else is here for him. He's here because his weakness is lust. And so all he wants to do is spend time with this woman. So if he has to tell her something in order to get her to stay with him and get her to shut up, he tells her. So why does he stay with her? Because he didn't get caught. No matter how many times he tells her, he's using his strength to get out of the situation. And so as long as this continues, he's perfectly safe, he's perfectly fine, he can stay with her and do what he wants. But again, we know he got caught. And that's where I want to stay focusing on right here. So eventually, we see in 16:15 that she said to him, "How can you say I love you when you will not share your secret with me? 3 times you have deceived me and have not told me what makes you so strong." She nagged him every day and pressured him until he was sick to death of it. Finally, he told her his secret. He said to her, "My hair has never been cut off, for I have been dedicated to God from the time I was conceived. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, I would become weak and be just like all other men." First thing here, Samson, she says to him, "How can you say I love you when you will not share your secret with me?" It's pretty obvious that he's saying that he loves her, but again, he's going from woman to woman to woman. He's just seeking what he can get out of this. But, so why did he tell her his secret? Because she nagged him. We see this all the time today, and nobody here does this, of course, but when you want something, you'll bug somebody repeatedly and ask them the same thing over and over and over again, especially the people you know you can get away with it because they're not going to do anything to you. Samson already did this. Last week, we went through it quickly, but we saw how with his first wife, there was the riddle. She asked him again and again and again. Finally, he told her the answer, and she went right to the Philistines and told them the answer. So you think this guy would learn from his mistakes, but no. Again, because he's so focused on him and everything else, he doesn't learn, he doesn't see the danger. All he sees is what he's getting out of it and what he can do, and he can stop it, and it's not a big deal. But she nags him, he eventually tells her, and everyone else knows what's coming. Everyone but him knows what's coming when he tells her. So he tells her, and she goes to the Philistines. And it's kind of funny, like I already said with the nagging. She knew she would get away with it. She knew she could tell him as many times as he wanted. If he was going to do something, he would have left right away after the first time she asked. If she was worried about it, she wouldn't have done it. But she knew that he wouldn't leave. He wouldn't leave despite her nagging. He wouldn't leave despite her obviously telling the Philistines. He was so focused on her that he couldn't see the danger. And that's something we do a lot. We get so focused on what feels right to us, what feels good, that we don't see the danger coming. And it wasn't like he wasn't warned against this. God clearly said, for one, don't be with women who aren't from your country. Don't be, in the Israelites' case, don't be with the Philistines. He went with the Philistine. He stayed with her. Because it says that she nagged him for days. He stayed with her for days, despite her continually almost obsession with just finding out this. And yet he still stayed with her. And we get the end result because of that. And it's the same for us today. If we continually stay with things that are bad for us, it may seem like a surprise to us when it happens, but to anybody else who sees this from the outside, you can see where the end result is. And of course, the end result for him is him losing his power, getting turned over to the Philistines, and eventually his death. But in verse 17, again, I want to focus on, he says, "My hair has never been cut, for I have been dedicated to God from the time I was conceived." He was supposed to have been dedicated to God, and it's true, his hair was never cut. And he was supposed to have been the Nazirite vow. But was he actually following the Nazirite vow? It's kind of funny. He talks about how he's dedicated because he's never cut his hair. He glosses over every other aspect of the Nazirite vow. And if you remember from last week, that's because he had no problem breaking every other aspect of the Nazirite vow. Not supposed to touch a dead thing? Well, if there's something I want in there, I'm going to get it. Not supposed to drink? You can guarantee this guy was drinking and having parties and probably going out of town like he did this time to do whatever he wanted. He wasn't above breaking the vow when it suited him, and when it suited him was any time he wanted to have a good time. And so again, you see this character here who says, I'm dedicated to God, I am following, I don't cut my hair, and he has managed to connect it like we all do when we read the story. It's all about his hair. And in his own mind, it's all about his hair. It's all about, as long as I do this, I can do whatever I want because I am following God. He's completely glossed over that it was supposed to be, I'm dedicated to God, and then God is helping me. And that's the thing that we often miss in the story. That's what he missed, and that's why all these problems occurred. And so he says, I would become weak and be just like all other men. Again, I would be just like everybody else. Right now, I'm this big guy. I'm this tough guy. I can do what I want. If this would happen, then I would be just like everybody else. And you can almost hear the condescending everybody else or all other men. He definitely sees himself as not only different from all other men, but better than all other men. Just another example of Samson's character. And like we keep saying, and like the book of Judges keeps showing, these judges were not always the best people. They were the best people for the job that he had available. Out of all of Israel, God picked the people that were available and the people that Israel deserved. Not necessarily the best people, but the people that they deserved. And not because of what they did or not because of anything they did, but because despite Israel completely turning against him again and again, God still had his promise to keep. God still said that he would protect Israel and deliver them. And yet, even when, like this time, they didn't even ask for help, God still was faithful and kept his promise to keep Israel safe. And he did so through the best available candidate, Samson. And if this was the best candidate, imagine how the other candidates were. So, 16:18, who would have guessed this? When Delilah saw that he had told her his secrets, she sent for the rulers of the Philistines, saying, come up here again, for he has told me his secret. So they come up, bring silver. She made him go to sleep again. She cuts his hair, and his strength left him. And this is where we always get it confused here in 16:19. She didn't cut his hair, and he lost his strength. She cut his hair. God left him because he had broken the final part of the vow. And because God left him, he lost his strength. And that is a huge difference there. It's not Samson broke this, he lost his own strength. Samson failed God. He failed every other vow. God left because God said, if you do this, I will be with you. If you don't, I won't. And so, final vow he broke. And it's not like, a lot of people like to say that it's not Samson's fault, somebody else cut the hair. Who told her? How did she know that it was the hair? He told her. He basically said, if this happens, and again, he's so focused on himself and it can't be, nothing could go wrong, that he gives away the secret and he gives away it, probably knowing it would happen. There's no way you can't know this is going to happen after every other time with the Philistines. And yet she nagged him so much and he got so sick of it, but wouldn't leave, that he told her. And so he broke the final part of the vow. God left him. And because God left him, the strength God had given him left him. So here we see somebody who is so focused on themselves and what they're doing, they're not noticing and not seeing that God isn't granting him this, God has given him this, God has given him this, and what God gives, God can take away. He twisted in his mind the same way we do, so much so that in his mind, it was all about what he was doing, and therefore he was in control. And if he didn't want this to happen, it wasn't going to happen. As long as he kept doing this, as long as he followed the part of the vow that he wanted to follow, it works. And we do that a lot. We make vows to God, and we say, we'll do this and this. And then, oh, I don't want to do this, but I'm still following this, so I'm following the vow that I gave. And as long as I'm doing this part, we're just going to ignore this because I'm doing this good over here. Samson was the same way. I have 4 things I'm supposed to follow. Let's focus on what I'm still following and ignore everything else because everyone else is ignoring it anyway, so why do I have to? And yet, God with Samson said no. And he still, it's really cool to see here. He had broken so many of the vow already, and God still stayed with him, and God still, not because Samson deserved it, not because Samson needed it, but because God was faithful, and God was still using Samson to save Israel. And yet here, we see Samson's no longer doing anything for Israel, so God's not going to help him do his own personal thing against God. So God leaves. He loses his strength because God left. And I want to hear verse 20 because that's the memory verse. She said, "The Philistines are here, Samson." He woke up and thought, "I will do as I did before and shake myself free." But he did not realize that the Lord had left him. Again, I think this sums up his attitude really well. I will do as I did before and shake myself free. This was all about him. It wasn't anything else. It wasn't God. It wasn't I've been helped. It wasn't anything. It was just, this is all on me. I can do it because I'm the best, and I'm going to do it because I can, not because I've been given the help. And by doing this, he's not realizing God has left, and it's no longer him, and he can't do it. And that's the attitude we have a lot. We get so focused on the gifts we've been given. God gave us this, God gave us that. And we start focusing so much on what we're doing with it that soon we forget where it's coming from, and it just becomes about what we're doing. Whether it's teaching, preaching, going out, helping people, even the best intentions can turn good people proud, arrogant, bad, if we forget that it's God who's giving us all these things to begin with. And so he's captured. The Philistines take him away. He spends the rest of his life in prison, basically. And then at the end, if anyone remembers the story, they let his hair grow back, which that's not what gives him his power back, because it doesn't say that his hair grew back and he immediately regained his strength. But it's kind of careless of them, since everyone thought it was his hair. Why would they let his hair grow back if that was what it was? But I did want to point out there, because if it was just his hair that was giving him the strength, he wouldn't have had to ask for his strength back after his hair grew back. But as he's in prison, the Philistines are celebrating. And of course, what do you do when you're celebrating the capture of a great person? Parade them in front of everybody to show that you have control over them. So in 1625, it says, when they really started celebrating, they said, "Call for Samson so he can entertain us." So they summoned Samson from the prison, and he entertained them. They made him stand between 2 pillars. So before I go into the next part, we always think that, okay, we're still in our mind. We always focus on Samson did this, Samson did this. And so at the end, it's like, well, okay, well, maybe he hasn't been good, but he at least died at the end doing what he was supposed to for God, right? He died nobly trying to help Israel get rid of these people. But when you read it, you're going to see that even that wasn't really the same. Because Samson, in 1626, Samson said to the young man who held his hand, "Position me so I can touch the pillars that support the temple. Then I can lean on them." Now the temple was filled with men and women, and all the rulers of the Philistines were there. There were 3,000 men and women on the roof watching Samson entertain. Samson called to the Lord, "O Master, Lord, remember me, strengthen me just one more time, O God, so I can get my swift revenge against the Philistines for my 2 eyes." So, what do you see here? This wasn't about carrying out God. This wasn't about anything. This was about Samson getting vengeance for what they did to him. His whole life was a cycle, like we said last week, his whole life was a cycle of, they did this to me, I'm going to do this, then they're going to do this, and I'm going to do this. Even at the end, you think after being captured, having God leave him, having his eyes gouged out, which is what they did when they captured him, and being forced to serve them and entertain them, maybe would have humbled this guy a little bit. But no, at the very end of his life, the only thing that maybe seems a little bit humble is that he finally realized that his strength wasn't from him and said, God, give me the strength back that you gave. Not even so I can serve you. It was all about revenge. Give me your strength back so I can get revenge on these people and show them what happens when you deal something to me. And that seems like a pretty selfish prayer, but how often do we pray? Maybe not for revenge, but we pray, God, can you give me this? Because I did this. I deserve this because what's for example? Can you help me because I am always helping you? I deserve this. It's the karma theology. We help God out, God helps us out. And that's not how it's supposed to be, but that's how we do it all the time. That's how Samson sees it here, and that's just one of the biggest mistakes we always have. God saving us gave us so much more than we ever deserve that anything extra is a bonus. And yet we get so focused again on what we've done for God that we always ignore what he's done for us. And a lot of our prayers end up looking like this. And it may not sound as harsh, but when you actually think about it, we're telling God that what he's given us isn't enough. He owes us more for what we did. And if he gave us everything, how much more can he give us that we deserve when we really did deserve nothing at all? And so you'd think that the answer to this prayer would be, you're going to demand something from me when you have done nothing to earn it? No. But what did God do? He gives him his strength back. And when he was given his strength back, Samson took hold of the two middle pillars that supported the temple, and he leaned against them with his right hand on one, his left hand on the other. And he said, let me die with the Philistines. He pushed hard. The temple collapsed on the rulers and all the people in it. He killed many more people in his death than he killed during his life. That's the legacy of Samson. He killed people. He killed people. At the end of his life, he killed more people than he killed when he was alive. And yet we always focus on how strong he was and all the great things he did. So why did God grant Samson the strength to kill more people at the end of his life when he didn't deserve it? Same reason he gives us stuff when we don't deserve it. He is faithful. At the beginning of his life, an angel appeared to his parents and said, you will have a son, you will set him aside, he will be special, and he will begin to deliver Israel from the Philistines. Did Samson follow God in any way? No. Did he begin to deliver Israel from the Philistines despite going against God at every possible turn? Yes. Even at the end of his life, through his selfish prayer and selfish desire, God still used him to get rid of the Philistine leaders that were oppressing Israel, despite him having no intention to do anything but get revenge. And so, if God can do that with Samson, how much more can he do that with us? We might not have been given strengths, and we might not have been given the stuff that Samson was given. We've been given the whole scripture. We've been given spiritual gifts. Each person who is a member of the body of Christ has been given spiritual gifts to serve Christ. And if we pledge ourselves to him, he will use us. If we turn away from him, he will still use us. But how much better would it be for us? And how much more could we accomplish if we follow him? Like we've seen throughout Judges in these last couple of weeks. The judges that followed God the closest brought about the greatest change. The Christians who follow God the closest can bring about the greatest change. The ones who don't will still bring about change and bring about God's will. But it might not look like the same happy journey that it does with the ones who follow him willingly. And one of the ways we talk about that here is the path. We start on the path with faith, and then we go throughout these steps. And each of these steps is another all-in dedication. It's more of knowing him better and loving him more. And every time we do this, we are accomplishing his will. And so everybody here, Samson had a choice, he chose wrong. Everybody here has a choice. Do we follow him or not? In the book of Judges, all this time we would go through these judges, and it seems like this horrible thing, and we're always This series seems to have just been picking apart these people who we always looked up to and saying how horrible they were. And why would we even study the book of Judges if all we're doing is saying how horrible each of these people is and how it got last? The book of Judges was not about the judges. The book of Judges was one continuing story of Israel turning away from God, God keeping his promise. Each time Israel turned away and they came back, God said, okay, you've come back to me, now I'm going to save you. They turned away again. And most people will be like, oh, you had your chance, no more. God said, I'm going to be with you, I'm going to protect you. And so again, he protects them, he brings up somebody else. Each time it was somebody worse, but each time Israel was worse, he couldn't bring up this perfect person in a country that wasn't perfect. And yet still, every time they turned away from him and did not be faithful to him, he was still faithful to them. And if he did that back then, and he's always the same, if we turn away from him, is he going to turn away from us? No. And so that is what the book of Judges is about. It's about God's faithfulness despite our unfaithfulness. And so we need to remember that and always remember that God will use us one way or another. The only thing that changes is how willing we are to be used by him, how willing we are to be faithful to him. Because God cannot be unfaithful to us, but we can certainly be unfaithful to him. And so, like I said, this is a little bit of a short summary, and it kind of ended on a sad note with Samson and Judges. But next week, we get to see the story of Ruth and how, despite all the evil that was going on in Israel and all the evil and each judge being worse, there is bright spots here and there of people who are still living for God. And so we get to kind of end the series on a good note. But before we do that, this week I just want to challenge everybody. Are we willing to serve God? Have we been willing? Are we turning away from God right now? And if we are turning away from God, we need to remember, no matter how far away we've turned, God is still right there willing to help us. He was right there with Israel waiting for them to turn to him. He's right there with us waiting for us to turn around. And so if we are turned away from him, all we need to do is just turn right back around to him and say, I am now willing to follow you. If we are following him, we need to be saying, I'm willing to be used by you. I'm willing to take those gifts you've given me and go and use them to accomplish your will for your glory, not for my own personal gain. And so, like I said, the memory verse this week is 16:20, and I want to focus on the last part of it. He woke up and thought, I will do as I did before and shake myself free. But he did not realize the Lord had left him. We see two different sides here, one focusing on personal and one on what God did. And so I chose this verse because it really highlights we can either focus on what we do or we can focus on what God is doing in us. So this week I just challenge everybody, look for opportunities to be serving God, look for opportunities to be growing, and try to see in all these circumstances, is this actually me, or is God trying to use me for something greater? And am I getting in the way, or am I helping? If you guys could fill out your connection cards this week, let me know what you thought. If you saw something I didn't, the Bible is not a one and done. The Bible is for everybody, and sometimes people see different things. So if you saw something or you heard something that maybe you didn't even realize this about Samson before, and you've always read it the same way I used to read it, is Samson this great guy who had great gifts? But now you see that it's not about the person, it's about God behind the person. So just fill those out, turn those in, and I'm going to close us in a word of prayer today.